Right now, somewhere in the world, a woman is about to have a baby in a hospital room with monitors beeping, an epidural on standby, and a doctor who's done this 1,000 times. You probably picture birth as clinical, controlled, managed. But strip away the machines, the drugs, the bright lights, and you're looking at one of the oldest, most dangerous, most repeated events in the entire human story. It's older than writing, older than farming, older than fire, probably. Every single person who has ever lived got here the same way, through the same terrifying door. So how did humans actually do this for hundreds of thousands of years with no hospitals, no doctors, and no anesthesia at all? Let's go back to the very beginning because the answer starts with a problem evolution never quite solved. The design flaw. Here's something wild. Childbirth is dangerous for humans in a way it just isn't for almost any other animal. A giraffe gives birth standing up, and the baby drops 6 feet onto the ground and is walking within an hour. A gazelle can be born, stand, and outrun a predator on day 1. Humans? We're a mess by comparison. Anthropologists call this the obstetrical dilemma. When our ancestors started walking upright, around 4 to 6 million years ago, the pelvis had to narrow. Narrow hips make for efficient walking. But then our brains started getting bigger, way bigger. So you've got a skull trying to get bigger and a birth canal trying to get smaller. At the exact same time, over millions of years. Something had to give. The compromise nature landed on is why human babies are born so early, relatively speaking. A newborn chimp is more developed at birth than a newborn human. Our babies come out helpless, floppy, unable to even hold up their own heads, basically still finishing construction outside the womb. That's the price of a big brain, and it means birth itself became a genuine bottleneck, a moment where things could and did go wrong constantly. Which raises the question, if it's this risky, how did anyone survive it long enough for humans to become, well, humans? The first midwives weren't even human. Here's where it gets strange. Some researchers think birth assistance might predate our species entirely. Primatologists have observed other primates, bonobos, some monkeys occasionally helping a female during labor. Not constantly, not reliably. But enough that scientists like anthropologist Wenda Trevathan have proposed that some form of birth assistance may go back millions of years, possibly even before the human lineage split off. Trevathan's theory is that the obstetrical dilemma didn't just shape babies, it shaped social behavior. Because human birth is so difficult, and because babies come out facing away from the mother, unlike most primates, a woman giving birth alone has a much harder time simply catching and guiding her own baby out safely. So natural selection may have favored females who wanted company during labor, and companions who were willing to help. Think about that for a second. The instinct to have someone with you during one of the scariest moments of your life might be older than language itself. Midwifery might be one of the oldest professions on Earth, older than farming, older than pottery, older than the wheel by an enormous margin. Bones that remember birth. Fast forward to actual fossil evidence, and things get even more specific. In 2020, researchers studying a fossil skeleton known as Ardipithecus ramidus, about 4.4 million years old, and other early hominin pelvises found something telling. The birth canal shape in these early ancestors was already twisted and complicated compared to other apes. Then there's the famous Lucy skeleton, Australopithecus afarensis, roughly 3.2 million years old. Researchers who reconstructed her pelvis, including work by anatomist Jeremy De Silva, found her birth canal was wider, side to side, but shallow front to back, a completely different shape than a modern human's. That means Lucy's babies were probably born in a different position entirely, possibly facing the mother, not away from her, the opposite of how modern human babies emerge. Somewhere between Lucy and us, birth itself changed shape. It got harder, more rotational, more dangerous, and more in need of a second pair of hands. Here's what makes this so important. Birth wasn't just a biological event our ancestors endured. Some researchers argue it's a hidden engine behind human cooperation itself. If childbirth demanded help, and infants were born helpless and needed years of care, then early humans who lived in groups, who shared food, who looked out for mothers and babies, those groups survived. The ones who didn't. In other words, the sheer difficulty of human birth might be one of the reasons humans became such intensely social, cooperative creatures in the first place. Birth didn't just bring new humans into the world. It may have helped build the social glue that let humans exist as a species at all. That's a big claim for something that happens in about 12 hours and involves a lot of screaming. Neanderthal deliveries. Let's jump ahead to around 60,000 years ago to a Neanderthal woman whose pelvis was reconstructed by researchers from a fossil found at Taban Cave in Israel. For decades, scientists debated whether Neanderthal babies had heads too big for their mothers' pelvises, similar to the tight squeeze modern humans deal with. The 2020 study, led by researcher Latimer and colleagues using 3D scans, suggested Neanderthal birth was probably just as difficult and complex as our own, maybe even requiring a similar rotational birth process, where the baby has to turn as it moves through the canal, which means Neanderthals almost certainly needed birth attendants too. Picture it, a cold cave, firelight, and a small circle of women who've done this before, holding a laboring Neanderthal through contractions using nothing but experience passed down by watching, by doing, by surviving it themselves. No epidurals, no forceps, just hands, herbs, and hard-won knowledge. And here's the eerie part. Some of that knowledge might still be genetically written into you right now. Modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA, inherited through interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago, including gene variants linked to pregnancy and childbirth, according to geneticists studying ancient DNA like Svante Pääbo's team. That means some of what your body does during birth might trace back to a Neanderthal mother, in a cave, tens of thousands of years before Egypt existed. The first written advice. Now, let's jump forward to somewhere we actually have documents. Ancient Egypt, around 1800 BCE. Archaeologists have recovered papyri like the Kahun gynecological papyrus that contains some of the oldest known medical writing about pregnancy and birth on Earth. The advice ranges from surprisingly practical to, honestly, kind of hilarious. Egyptian physicians recommended things like testing pregnancy by having a woman urinate on barley and wheat seeds. If the barley sprouted first, they predicted a boy. Wheat first, a girl. Modern researchers have actually tested this. And weirdly, the urine of pregnant women does sometimes affect seed germination differently than non-pregnant urine, possibly due to hormone levels. It's not a reliable gender test, but it might be one of the oldest pregnancy tests in human history that actually had a kernel of real biology behind it. Egyptian women typically gave birth in a squatting or kneeling position, sometimes on specially made birth bricks. And in 2001, archaeologists working at the site of Abydos actually found one. A decorated mud brick dated to around 1700 BCE, painted with images believed to represent protective goddesses watching over labor. That's a physical object made specifically to help a woman give birth. That survived nearly 4,000 years. Think about that. Somebody's birthday, preserved in mud and paint, longer than most empires have lasted. The goddesses of labor. Here's the thing about birth in the ancient world. It was terrifying enough that basically every civilization built religion around it. In Egypt, there was Taweret, a goddess depicted as part hippo, part crocodile, part lion, specifically meant to protect women during labor. In Mesopotamia, there were incantations recited to ease difficult births, recorded on clay tablets dating back over 3,500 years. In many cultures, birth was considered dangerous enough to require its own specialists, its own rituals, its own protective charms, because the risk was brutally real. Historians estimate that in societies without modern medicine, maternal mortality could run somewhere around 1 in 100 births, sometimes higher, an almost unthinkable number by today's standards, where in wealthy countries that number is closer to 1 in 10,000 or better. That gap from roughly 1 in 100 to 1 in 10,000 represents one of the single greatest medical achievements in human history. But it didn't happen quickly, and it definitely didn't happen evenly. But here's the problem. For most of history, birth knowledge belonged almost entirely to women. Midwives passed down orally, generation to generation, refined through raw experience. Then, starting in the 1600s and accelerating through the 1700s and 1800s in Europe, male physicians began pushing into a space that had been exclusively female for basically all of human history. The forceps, a genuinely useful tool for difficult births, were actually invented around the early 1600s by the Chamberlain family in England, and they kept it a secret for generations. The Chamberlains would arrive at a birth, send everyone else out of the room, work under a sheet so no one could see the tool, and charge a fortune for it. An invention that could save lives during obstructed labor was hoarded as a trade secret for roughly a century. Meanwhile, midwives who had centuries of hands-on experience were increasingly pushed out, discredited, sometimes literally accused of witchcraft. especially during the European witch trials of the 1500s and 1600s, where unusual knowledge about herbs, pain relief, and birth control made midwives frequent targets. Some historians argue this wasn't a coincidence. The witch trials coincided with a period where male-dominated medical institutions were actively trying to take control of childbirth away from women. Knowledge that had kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years got rebranded as suspicious, even dangerous. The modern turn. By the 1800s, hospital births started becoming more common, especially for wealthier women. But early hospitals were, ironically, sometimes more deadly than home births. Doctors moving between autopsies and delivery rooms without washing their hands spread something called childbed fever, which killed shocking numbers of new mothers. In 1847, a doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis, working in Vienna, noticed that wards where doctors washed their hands with a chlorine solution had dramatically lower death rates than wards where they didn't. He was right, genuinely right, a discovery that would eventually save millions of lives. And the medical community mostly ignored him, ridiculed him, and Semmelweis died in an asylum before germ theory caught up and proved him correct. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs in birth history weren't ancient rituals or clever tools. They were just somebody insisting, wash your hands, and nobody listening. Where that leaves you. So think about the chain that leads to that hospital room from the very start of this video. An evolutionary trade-off between brains and hips that made birth uniquely dangerous for our entire species. Primate ancestors who may have needed help giving birth millions of years before humans existed. Neanderthal mothers in caves, aided by companions, whose genes might live in your body right now. Egyptian birth bricks preserved in the sand for 4,000 years. Goddesses invented specifically to guard the most dangerous night of a woman's life. Secret forceps hoarded by one greedy family. Midwives burned for knowledge that was, more often than not, simply correct. A doctor destroyed for being right about washing your hands. That entire chain, hundreds of thousands of years long, is the reason birth today looks the way it does. So here's the full picture. Birth is older than tools. It might be older than our own species. It shaped how humans cooperate, how we form communities, maybe even why we bother helping strangers at all. It built goddesses, secret medical dynasties, and eventually modern medicine through a brutal, uneven, sometimes tragic process of trial and error spanning millions of years. And that hospital room from the start of the video, the monitors, the doctor, the calm and controlled version of birth we picture as ordinary, that's not the ancient default. That's the rare exception, the outcome of an almost unbelievably long and difficult climb. Being born has always been one of the most dangerous things a human does. And the fact that you're alive to hear this sentence means someone, a mother, and probably someone standing beside her, survived it. Every person you've ever met has that same story buried somewhere behind them. That's what it means to be human. We show up to the hardest moments for each other. We have, apparently, for millions of years. If you found this as fascinating as I did, stick around. There's a lot more of this kind of, why are humans like this history waiting for you.